How they stand. Tabulation of the 95 most significant roll call votes in Congress reveals that Barry Goldwater is the best man in the U.S. Senate. Of the 10 best senators, 7 are Republicans, 3 are Democrats. 4 Democrat senators earned 0 ratings. The worst Republican in the Senate is Jacob Javits of New York with a rating of 6. The House is the best in a generation, however. 2 representatives have perfect conservative voting records. 18 have ratings of 90% or better. The worst Republican in the House is Lindsay of New York with a rating of 34. 7 House Democrats earned 0 ratings. The voting records of all members of Congress is a useful tool for political action in this key political year. That is a summary of my report on how they stand. The full report after a message from my sponsor. I agree with Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of Independence, and with James Madison, father of the Constitution, that the federal government cannot legally do anything, no matter how seemingly desirable or widely approved, that is not clearly authorized by some specific grant of power in the Constitution. Any action of the federal government not patently authorized by the Constitution is illegal, unconstitutional, regardless of Supreme Court decisions, of presidential decrees, of previous congressional acts, or of treaties with foreign nations. Using this constitutional principle as a guide, I have published ratings of all members of the National Congress. The ratings reflect the voting of legislators on the 95 most significant roll call votes taken from the convening of the 88th Congress in January 1963 to June 1964. In selecting roll calls to tabulate, I eliminate those which merely reflect moderate versus extravagant spending, Republicans versus Democrats, middle-of-the-roadism versus extremist liberalism, limited versus total surrender of national sovereignty. I select votes which show legislators for or against the principle that government must implicitly obey the Constitution, as ordained, adopted, and legally amended, for or against maintaining the absolute national sovereignty of the United States, for or against measures to defend our nation against all enemies, foreign or domestic. This factual, impartial listing reveals that the 10 highest conservative ratings in the U.S. Senate were earned by 7 Republicans and 3 Democrats. The top 5, Barry Goldwater with a conservative rating of 96%, Strom Thurmond, South Carolina Democrat, 94%, John Tower, Texas Republican, 92%, Millward Simpson, Wyoming Republican, 88%, Carl Curtis, Nebraska Republican, 87%. Most politicians talk better than they act. On the contrary, Senator Goldwater sometimes says things that make many constitutional conservatives wince. But in action, in standing up to be counted for roll call votes on vital issues before the National Congress, Barry Goldwater is the best man in the U.S. Senate. In contrast to Goldwater, there is a certain U.S. representative who talks like a real conservative, but in my report, his rating as a constitutional conservative is low because of the way he votes. He recently complained about this and said that my ratings are unfair and cited 2 examples. In 1963, he helped write and voted for the Clean Air Bill and the Vocational Education Bill. I recorded both those votes as liberal, that is, against constitutional principles. The representative defended himself by saying he believes in clean air and vocational education. I do too. But the Constitution does not authorize our federal government to spend tax money on any such programs. We must get federal bureaucrats out of all unconstitutional activities so that we can keep our own money to do things that need doing, do them right and at reasonable cost. Moreover, freedom for all is more important than government efforts to provide clean air and vocational education for some. This U.S. representative said his Clean Air Bill authorized a moderate program of federal aid for air pollution control. But, he mourned, the Senate rewrote his bill, enlarging its scope beyond all reason, making the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare a virtual dictator, empowered to do almost anything under pretext of promoting clean air. He said the same thing happened to his moderate vocational education bill. He voted against Senate versions of both bills when they came back to the House for final passage. I did not record those two votes. This is the main reason he thinks me unfair. I charged him with liberal votes when he supported the two modest bills, but did not credit him with conservative votes when he opposed the prodigal versions. He unlocked the door to admit two tame, lovable little unconstitutional programs. When the door cracked open, they swelled into monsters, bowling him over as they crowded in. He is chargeable with the unconstitutional act of unlocking the door in the first place. He is due no credit for sprawling helplessly on the floor after the damage was done. On the basis of roll call voting during the first 17 months of the 88th Congress, here are the worst U.S. Senators. Joseph Clark of Pennsylvania, Philip Hart of Michigan, Hubert Humphrey of Minnesota, and George McGovern of South Dakota, all of whom earned 0 ratings, which means that they voted against constitutional principles 100% of the time. Edward Kennedy of Massachusetts, Edward Long of Missouri, Eugene McCarthy of Minnesota, Maureen Neuberger of Oregon, John Pastore of Rhode Island, Claiborne Pell of Rhode Island, Pat McNamara of Michigan, and Abraham Ribicoff of Connecticut all earned ratings of 2, which means they voted against constitutional principles 98% of the time. The worst Republicans in the Senate are Jacob Javits of New York with a conservative rating of 6%, Kenneth Keating of New York, 9%, Clifford Case of New Jersey, 11%, Hugh Scott of Pennsylvania, 15%, Thomas Kickle of California, 17%, Hiram Fong of Hawaii, 19%, George Aiken of Vermont, 23%, John Cooper of Kentucky, 25%, Glenn Bell of Maryland, 28%. The present U.S. House of Representatives is, however, about the best in a generation. It has rejected or delayed a majority of the unconstitutional, totalitarian programs proposed by the Kennedy and the Johnson administrations. In 1962, only 83 U.S. representatives in the 87th Congress earned conservative ratings of 60% or better. In the first 17 months of the 88th Congress, 159 representatives earned ratings of 60% or better. 130 of them Republicans, 29 Democrats. 2 representatives had perfect 100% conservative voting records during the first 17 months of the 88th Congress. That is, from January 1963 to June 1964. Irene Baker, Republican from Tennessee, and Ralph Bierman, Republican from Nebraska, were the 2 100%ers. 16 other representatives, 13 Republicans and 3 Democrats, earned conservative ratings of 90% or better. John Ashbrook of Ohio and August Johansson of Michigan, 98%. Bruce Alger, Ed Foreman, and Joe Poole of Texas, 95%. James Haley of Florida, Durward Hall of Missouri, Dave Martin of Nebraska, James Quillen of Tennessee, and James Utt of California, 93%. Elmer Hoffman of Illinois, 91%. Homer Abil of Ohio, Donald Bruce of Indiana, Edward Gurney of Florida, Gene Snyder of Kentucky, and Arthur Winstead of Mississippi, 90%. The worst Republican in the House is John Lindsay of New York City, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, by the way. His conservative rating is 34%. 7 Democrats in the House of Representatives earned 0 ratings. Philip Burton of California, John Dingell of Michigan, Donald Fraser of Minnesota, Thomas Gill of Hawaii, William Green of Pennsylvania, Neil Stengler of Michigan, and Frank Thompson of New Jersey. The voting record of Senator Goldwater is especially interesting in the light of what happened following the California primary, which proved beyond all doubt that Barry Goldwater was the choice of the people for Republican presidential nomination. On the night of June 2nd, 1964, Senator Jacob Javits, most liberal Republican in the Senate, was interviewed on television. Evincing dismay at the large vote for Goldwater in California, Javits said Goldwater is irresponsible and represents only the fringe. Javits warned Goldwater to join the mainstream of the party, that is, the liberal Eisenhower, Rockefeller, Lodge, Javits stream. 6 days later, 3 other Republican liberals, Governor Rockefeller of New York, Scranton of Pennsylvania, and Romney of Michigan, also warned Goldwater that he must alter his conservative image. Knowing that Goldwater had the enthusiastic support of millions because of his conservative principles, Republican liberals and self-styled moderates, whose combined public support was less than that of Goldwater's, had the gall to demand that Goldwater forsake the principles and the people who had put him in striking distance of the White House. Now, they were not afraid that the Republican Party would lose with Goldwater, not at all. It has been obvious for a long time that Republicans could not win the presidency in 1964 with a rehashed edition of their 1960 platform and a warmed-over version of their 1960 candidate. Liberal Republicans would rather lose than win the presidency with a candidate who is a constitutional conservative. Regardless of the outcome of that race, conservatives should work relentlessly to put good men in Congress in 1964. All who order copies of this broadcast will get the ratings, which will show you who are the good men. Goodbye. God bless you. For a printed copy of this broadcast, send 25 cents to Dan Smoot, Dallas 14, Texas, and ask for 461. How they stand. 6 copies, $1.